Rolling. It's good to see everyone, and thank you so much for stopping by. I want to welcome you to Equity in Practice. I see some familiar faces, but I'll still introduce myself. My name is Kyle Trillo, and I serve as Director of Culture and Engagement here at the District's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and I want to welcome you again to Equity in Practice. So first and foremost, I want to recognize October as LGBTQ History Month. In this session, we want to take time to briefly explore the LGBTQ movement here in Philadelphia and explore the untold stories and pivotal moments that have shaped the LGBT community throughout the last 200 years. But before we begin, as normal, we want to go over just a few quick housekeeping rules. We want to make sure that all folks are remain on mute throughout the presentation. We'll have a Q&A section which will follow the presentation, so you'll have a chance to ask questions. Also want to make mention, as you've probably heard, this session will be recorded, and that's indicated in the top left corner. And so for today's session, we are welcoming the Historic Society of Pennsylvania. The Historical Society of Pennsylvania, founded in 1824, is one of the nation's largest archives and historical documents. Through education workshops, research opportunities, public programs, lectures throughout the year, they strive to make history relevant and exhilarating for all. And with that said, I want to take time. I want to mention also that I had time to visit the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, and it was an amazing experience. And I encourage you all to check out the website, the resources, and please visit if you have the opportunity. It's definitely truly a gem for the city of Philadelphia. So without further ado, join us for today's presentation is HSP's Education Program and National Histories Day Phillies coordinator, Katie Clark. And we also have the Historical Society of Pennsylvania's Director of Education and Program, Justina Barrett. Katie and Justina, thank you so much for the time. We really appreciate it, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kyle. It's really our delight to be here and to be sharing some of our resources with all of you and for all of you who might be watching the recording. Kyle, it was great to host you at HSP over the summer and to just give you a little bit of that tip of the iceberg of who we are and what we do. So we are, as you mentioned, a special collections library, and that means we collect and preserve and, put into nice boxes and folders and put onto line as best we can and make available to people the primary source documents, things like handwritten manuscripts, maps, government organizational records, all types of institutional records are in our collections, newspapers and books. We have over 21 million of them. So letters and documents from George Washington, Ben Franklin, those sorts of things, all the way up to the present. We still collect the lives of Philadelphia's of Pennsylvanians, and we make it accessible to people. Widely, those stories cover a great diversity of American stories. We group them into 4 different themes. So some of the things that we have under Pennsylvania Crucible of the Nation are things like early records from William Penn and the early founders, the conversations they were having as the colony was being founded, their interactions with local and not so local indigenous peoples. We have drafts of the U.S. Constitution, literally the first time in the room in late July of 1787 that members of the Constitutional Convention started to draft their ideas. We have those actual pieces of paper. We have things that we group around What's Your Story, community and family histories. So this is the records that are of genealogical interest to many communities, actually documenting many communities in all the states east of the Mississippi. So really broad American stories and local community records related to over 60 ethnic immigrant groups. So their newspapers, their houses of worship, their daily life papers. We have what we call America's Promise and its many voices. We have over 300 years of civil rights movement workers, all the way back to the 1688 anti-slavery document from Germantown, or protest from Germantown, to the work of the Vigilance Committee in the 1850s of the Underground Railroad here in Philadelphia, all the way to the gender equity work and women's suffrage that we'll be talking about today. Those are in letters, they're in diaries, they're in the papers of the people who undertook that work, whether it is William Still's Journal C, the handwritten entries of people arriving on the Underground Railroad, or to the papers that we will examine today of Dr. John Fryer of the 1970s and 80s. We also group some of our collections under Soul of America, that's visual performing and literary arts. We collect drawings, we collect drawings and watercolors, prints, and other works on paper, as well as the personal correspondence of artists and poets and writers, as well as the institutions that supported them, things like the Academy of Music, things like the Fairmount Park Art Association. We have their organizational records as well. We have first edition works of James Baldwin and Zora Neale Hurston. So really, again, 3 centuries worth of American stories. And finally, we group things under Americans in innovation, science, technology, and enterprise. That's things like industrial history through the company records. Companies like the Cox Mining Company up in northeastern Pennsylvania, where I'm from, the mining company and the workers that they employed. With financial institutions like the Bank of North America, and then scientific pursuits like the Bartram family here in Southwest Philadelphia. So that's a bit of a long, but that's a quick deep dive into our 21 million things. And again, what we do mostly is we function as a special collection reading room. So people come to us and they get to look at those documents. We put them in front of them and they get to read them and take pictures of them and use them in their research. We're open Tuesday through Friday with extended hours on Wednesday. So we are open for students. You know, your students can come here and do research in these primary documents. And we are here, Katie is one of the library staff that helps us welcome those students into the reading room. We have a lot of people doing their family history, as I said, genealogy, and then we have a lot of fellowships and opportunities for graduate students. So I just put on the screen one of our former fellows that we're very proud of, a scholar named Nicole Eustace, who won the Pulitzer Prize in History last year, based a lot on the work that she did here in our collection. We also do have some things digitized, so you can go to our digital library, and I'll put that in the chat in a second, but it's really only a fraction because 21 million is a lot of things to scan and get into a digital space. And then other ways that we get the stories from our collections out is through publications like the one that we are about to launch next Tuesday. We are celebrating our 200th anniversary next year, and we want to invite as many people as possible to come get engaged with us and learn more about who we are. We'll have a lot of reasons for you to come down to 13th and Locust. That's where we are, 13th and Locust in Center City, to come for a program, to come see an exhibit, to come hear a performance. So we're going to put the way you can connect to us, hsp.org/enews. We'll put that in the chat as well, so you can learn more about what we do. In addition to books, we also host programs, conversations, genealogy workshops, all these types of topics, all these types of opportunities to engage with us. So sign up for a newsletter at hsp.org and learn about what our other upcoming programs are. But I want you to connect with Katie, because she is going to talk about what our educational opportunities specifically for K-12 are.
Yeah, thank you, Justina. It's a lot to take in, but we're here to help you guys and your students access some of the resources that we have here at HSP. In addition to obviously students just being welcome in HSP's reading room, we have more dedicated initiatives for students of Philadelphia schools, specifically in field trips and virtual lessons. So both of these center primary source learning and archival experience for the students. They are free of charge to all schools in the Philadelphia School District. And they offer just an incredible way to really build a bridge to history. I think it can be very hard sometimes for students to feel a personal connection to certain things in history, to seeing themselves in the normal stories that we might see often in textbooks or the traditional narratives that are often told. Our field trips and our virtual lessons highlight the diversity of HSP's collections and make it so that more students can see themselves in history. And if they can't see themselves directly, then there's this other great opportunity to connect directly to the past, in that they literally hold a piece of history in their hands. They interact directly with a piece of paper that some individuals some 200 years ago also held. And it's that palpable connection that we can help students build as they experience different topics throughout history. Again, they cover a wide array, as diverse as our own collections. And we're always working to improve what we offer students and making sure that we do represent voices that are underrepresented in historical narratives. One of our newest topic offerings is specifically about Black activism in 19th century Philadelphia, highlighting the incredible and enormous effort and work by the free Black community in Philadelphia, both pre and post Civil War, to achieve freedom for those enslaved and also secure civil rights and secure the promises of liberty for citizens of Philadelphia and of the United States. So your students are always welcome to explore our collections in that way. Another thing that we are very proud of, as I fail to advance the slide. There we go. Sorry about that, folks. HSP is the home of National History Day Philadelphia. National History Day is an incredible program that, again, centers student research and student projects. And it is a way for students to flex their creative muscles, but also their critical thinking muscles. So it culminates in a research project. Students work under the auspices of an annual theme. 2024's theme is Turning Points in History. I will be harping on that a little bit when I talk a little bit more about some of our one of our collections when we talk about LGBTQ history in Philadelphia. So this is a way for students to choose a topic that they're interested in, that they are passionate about, and then explore it through the mode that they want. There are different ways that they can present their research. They can do websites, documentaries, exhibits, performances, or papers. They have the ability to work in groups or as individuals. And one thing that NHD Philly really emphasizes is accessibility for our students. There's no registration cost associated with NHD Philly. We make sure to provide project materials to all participating students. And in the event that our Philadelphia students do qualify to go on to the state level competition or then the national level competition, we provide funds to cover those registration costs, to cover lodging, food, transportation, things like that. We want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to explore history in their own fun way through NHD.
And to present it.
Yes.
To a colleague, to a community of colleagues, of other students.
Absolutely. It's an incredible way to immerse yourself in history and connect with a larger cultural milieu of Philadelphia, right? We make sure that students are able to access collections here at HSP, but also the resources in a dozen different cultural institutions, museums, libraries from across Philadelphia. So it's really about getting everybody access to the incredible things that Philadelphia has to offer. Okay.
All right.
Yes. There we go. So I mentioned turning points and the diversity of HSP's collection. And for the purposes of our talk here today, specifically about highlighting LGBTQ history in Philadelphia, I wanted to talk about a real turning point in that history and highlight how we might talk about this collection with your students. And so this concerns the John Fryer collection here. It's a massive collection. I think around like 400 boxes, if you can try and visualize that in your mind. It's always interesting to try and visualize that amount of history, like the amount of linear
feet. We measure history in linear feet here at the archives.
Yeah. So this is obviously just a small sampling of it, but it's a really important look into a moment of time that affected a lot of individuals, John Fryer specifically, and the community that he was a part of. So one of the goals that we have when we talk about John Fryer with students is to look at historic activism within the LGBT community and the different struggles and efforts that were undertaken to secure equality and equal rights for this community. To give you a background, John Fryer was a practicing psychiatrist and a Temple University professor in Philadelphia in the 1960s. He was also a gay man. but he kept this part of himself a secret from his professional contacts, from his colleagues, right? Because there was a real risk of both personal and professional consequences if people knew this about him. He faced the possibility of maybe being fired for his sexual identity. And perhaps most hard, if we can put ourselves kind of in this framework, maybe most hard for John Fryer to grasp and struggle with personally was, as a psychiatrist, he would have been very familiar with the DSM. So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is still actually used in the field of psychiatry today. Of course, it has undergone some revisions, one of which we will be talking about. But so yeah, it still lives on to this day. In 1972 and before, when John Fryer was practicing, the DSM listed homosexuality as a mental disorder. So this was one of the reasons that people could point to when they did actually criminalize homosexuality, when they tried to justify firings or just being, the different societal ramifications that could come. They could point to this official manual and say, well, here it is, classified as a mental disorder. On the screen also, you can see an undated photo of John Fryer that I'd like to point out, because if we flip to the next slide, thank you, Justina, for helping me slide transition. It's a really interesting, juxtaposition to this next photo, which is also a photo of John Fryer. There's even a very helpful handwritten note that says Dr. John. Because in 1972, John Fryer gave a speech at the American Psychological Association meeting that was held in May in Texas. He donned this disguise and took the name of Dr. Henry Anonymous again, to try and avoid the ramifications and consequences that could happen if he was outed as a gay man. But he took the stage in a disguise, and he said the following words that you can see on the screen. It says, "I am a homosexual. I am a psychiatrist." And he goes on to give this whole speech talking about why, the different reasons why that homosexuality should be removed from the DSM. And this speech, this event, is one of the most pressing and driving forces that was behind homosexuality being removed from the DSM in 1973. So John Fryer undertakes this great personal and professional risk, and he delivers this speech that helps turn this tide, literally a turning point in history. We can see the actual changes that occurred as a result of John Fryer's own activism at this point. Homosexuality was removed as a mental disorder in the next iteration of the DSM in 1973. So reading the words of John Fryer is an incredible insight, right, into how maybe he was feeling about this, the different steps that he took. And from the words we see written on the page, we can then take a bigger and broader view and place this struggle into a broader context, both culturally and politically. So if we turn the slide, some other highlights from our collection help to contextualize this event in John Fryer's life and in LGBTQ history. So on the screen, you can see different publications from advocacy groups and protests that were organized by the LGBTQ community and supporters and advocates. So we have the statement from the ACLU that is specifically written to denounce the actual criminalization of homosexuality and the penal repercussions, like people being jailed over their sexual identity. The document on the screen is from 1966, and then the pamphlet we have is from 1968. So both of these precede the convention by a few years, but it gives us this idea that this was not just one flashpoint, right? There was an entire movement, and this movement fits right into this era that maybe some of us are more familiar with, right? Within the broader context of civil rights and the struggle for equity in America. The pamphlet is, I think, really interesting also to take a further look at too. It's the 4th annual reminder day for essentially a protest, an organized rally that's held in Philadelphia outside Independence Hall on July 4th, a date that is obviously very important and recognizable to, I think I'm comfortable saying, all Americans. I hate to, speak in such definitive terms, but for this, I'll chance it. And it highlights the disparity in the promises of equality that the 4th of July represents, right? There are people that were not being treated fairly, that were being denied their rights, that were being persecuted because of their orientation, because they were members of the LGBTQ community. I'm going to keep saying that, and it's going to get probably rougher as we go on. So this incredible division, right? We can see people and the efforts people were taking to bridge that gap. And these documents help us see that story. So these are some of the broader perspectives, right? Then to take another step back to maybe a more personal one. So obviously we saw the words of John Fryer and the speech he gave in his capacity as a psychiatrist. Then we can take a look at his journal entry that was written on May 3rd, which is the day after that he gave this speech in Texas. And we just need to focus on one opening line, which is, "The day has passed, it has come and gone, and I am still alive." So this sense of relief that we get from Fryer is palpable, it's tangible in just that one line. And we can see how he was experiencing it on a personal level. And I love to pair that with this photograph, which is from 1976. It's from a Pride Parade in Philadelphia. And this collection consists of images of people that were just at this parade, simply existing and smiling and proud, right? It's this incredible glimpse into the fact that, this is a community that has always been here and have been existing and smiling. And we have that evidence, and we have the written words that say they have gone through these things and they are still alive. The perseverance is incredible to see in these documents and to highlight, and is something that is worthwhile, I think, as we tell the story of LGBTQ community history in Philadelphia and on a broader scale. Obviously highlighting the incredible struggles, the difficulties faced, the lives lost in this history, but also making sure that we can share the stories of triumph and of continuing on to a better day. That's a little bit of John Fryer.
So thank you, Katie. That's one of the lessons we offer, that we can zoom into your classroom to present and engage students in some of those questions. We have many of them. That is the strongest one for LGBTQ history. And there is a marker right outside 13th and Locust, a blue and gold state marker acknowledging John Fryer's importance and that whole movement that he represents. I want to take maybe another 10 minutes here and then open this up for questions, because I think this is really where we want educators to think about the way they can use history in their classroom to advance equity goals. When you study history, you're actually, if you're studying it well and not maybe misusing history, you are in just ultimately advancing the way students can learn and practice equity in their lives. When you engage in this work in the classroom, it will always support your DIA work, because studying history allows us to understand ourselves better and then understand the world that is shaped around us and how we move through that world. So when you study history, things like you develop multiple points of view. especially when we look at primary documents, when we're not just reading a textbook where an author, a scholar has already distilled the meaning into 2 paragraphs. When we look at the primary documents, we are actually seeing a perspective, and it might be a perspective we associate with, or it might not be. And it helps to trigger the question, why did they think this way? What were they learning? What were they thinking about? What was their context? And what might be a different way that somebody had experienced the same thing? I'm thinking about the picture of John Fryer in his costume, in his disguise. He's sitting next to 2 gay activists who are not psychiatrists, but they are out and they are helping, or they have really kind of fostered this environment for him to do what he needed to do. So Barbara Gittins, the woman on the left, has a different perspective of that moment than John Fryer does. And the primary documents help us examine and then hopefully develop that differences. Who are they talking to? What was their context? It helps to establish, when you ask these questions and then pursue, understanding them a little bit more, reading about them a little bit more, what is the cultural context and what is its impact? Why would they say that? And of course, then that helps us understand, why things might be the way they are and how others that have a different cultural context may be experiencing the same event differently, or the same situation differently. So that's basic inclusion work that I think many people practice already in their classrooms. And then I get excited because history literally gives us civic education tools. It gives us examples. It's full of conflict, compromise, and collaboration. And it's full of stories of people shaping their communities and then moving their communities to hopefully shape a better world. And we see that. When we're studying American history, or even local history specifically, we see direct examples of civics in action. So whether we're talking about somebody professionally trying to change their profession, or we're talking about legal strategies for getting new laws passed, or economic boycotts, or direct resistance, or hearts and minds campaigns, we have all of those stories of the people who are engaging in those strategies and what the short-term consequences are and what the long-term consequences are. And so it really engages students in thinking about what is civic action, what are options that people, Americans in particular, in our American context, have used and can use over time. And then, of course, studying history helps us negotiate our own identity. I kind of, for those of you who are Indigo Girls fans, I love to refer to the Galileo song and how she's talking about reincarnation, and now suddenly my whole life makes sense. So I don't necessarily want to say we're studying reincarnation, but when we study history, we understand a little bit more about why we are the way we are. And for young people who are negotiating identities, that's what young people do. That is their job. Having examples of other people who are like them and have gone through changes, or other people who aren't like them, but give context to the world that they are in, it really helps us, understand why we do the things that we do a little bit better. This is why people study family history, by the way. This is why they do genealogy. You all make a lot more sense when you learn about your family history. And I hope it's satisfying. I hope it's therapeutic. I hope it doesn't bring up anything that you can't work through. And then again, as you're doing work specifically around LGBTQ history, the same things apply that you would do in your classroom around creating safe and supportive learning environments for all students. So, I jumped a little bit ahead. Things that you would do in your classroom to provide the individual learner some space, and then things that you would do in your classroom to develop a commitment to inclusion and diversity and equity, so that as that community of learners, everybody can come together. Those are basic tools of equity that I think LGBTQ community history helps you get at and helps you practice as you have been doing this. As you're doing LGBTQ history, we always like to use people first language, that these are people in the community, that they're activists, they are professionals, they are doing whatever they are doing, who identify, if they do identify, in the community. and allowing that they live in a complex and intersectional world themselves. John Fryer did what he did as a gay man. He did what he did as a psychiatrist. But then he also, was beyond that. He was a church musician. He was an activist for AIDS rights in West Africa at one point in his life. He was a dog lover, so he was a white cis man. So he did have those perspectives as well. So appreciating that people in history have the same complexities that we do, and looking to them for examples, but not necessarily holding them in the same way, that we do to only being one dimensional. I forgot to say who was on the screen. That's what I have to go back and talk about. I just looked at my notes. I included this slide because this is one of we're talking about representation matters, identity matters. And these are images from our collection of a woman named Edith Houghton, who played baseball in the 1920s. And then she was hired by the Phillies. So this is very timely to Red October, as the first female baseball scout. So she was out scouting talent in the 1940s. And you can see these are from a newspaper archive, and the caption for the picture on the right describes her. Miss Houghton, with no time for dolls or dishes, went in for diamond game while young and has been at it ever since. And so this is a person who we can see in her professional choices was making choices outside of what many women at the time were doing. We don't know if she identified in the LGBTQ community. Scholars, I mean, there are researchers who maybe have done more work on her, but she did present herself as a less feminine person throughout her career, as she negotiated that identity. So she's a really fun one. And then I also put up Violet Oakley, who is a Pennsylvania artist who lived a life in the early 20th century in a community of female artists, and later shared a household with her lifelong companion, Edith Emerson. And in my next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about how we answer that question when students ask, well, was she gay? Was she a lesbian? Did she call herself a lesbian? And so, how do we negotiate those? Before I say that, windows and mirrors is a term I think some people use in inclusive practice. Mirrors allow students to see themselves in the content that you're presenting. Windows allows students who have a different experience or a different point of view to understand a different perspective. So that's what we do in history. That's what multiple perspectives are in history. And LGBTQ community history allows us to do that better. And then we want to make sure we're engaging in those practices when we encounter it. So when students are, when you do present a person like Edith Houghton or Violet Oakley, and they say, well, was she, and students use the word queer a lot now, was she gay? Was she a lesbian? And we, again, bring the same respect to people's identity who are no longer with us as we do to people who are with us. We don't put labels that we don't know. If it's not in their record, in their words, in their oral histories, I don't necessarily say, yes, she was a lesbian, because the language, the context is different. Those questions that we use to answer the question when the student says, was she a lesbian, allow us to engage in the same historical thinking that we should be for any question in historical, in a historical inquiry. So why would she or would she not call herself a lesbian? What is the context of the time of Violet Oakley, 1920s, 1910s? What is the economic, structure that she operates in? Does she have the freedom to live a life, or does she need to get married and have a male breadwinner provide her, her income for her? What are the legal ramifications? I mean, it's, homosexuality practiced could be enforced, penalized legally in many places, in many ways, and with different vigor until very recently in some states. So why would we not have the words that we need to, as a historian, say, yeah, I'd say she's gay? We're not necessarily going to find those words. Maybe an artistic community provides more safety. So might a gay person find safety in an artistic community where she is able to sell her art and get commissions in a way that she might not? You know, my great grandmother at the same time was a teacher, you know, that she's not going to be able to practice, be openly gay or even somewhat closeted gay in the 19 teens. So what is her context? Does that offer us any insight? And then just as we would for anything else, asking the student, what question are we actually trying to answer? And how does that inform our research? What would the historical record look like that would allow us to say, yes, this person is, you know, would identify in the LGBTQ community? So on the screen, I have a person named Polly Murray, who is an amazing scholar mind, or a legal advocate and scholar mind. Her work helped lead to the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education. She worked with Thurgood Marshall. I mean, she was an amazing legal scholar in the mid 20th century into the second half of the 20th century. She was born about 1910, and in the 1930s, and at that point in their lives, were seeking medical help around questioning whether they were intersex, looking around as to what their sexual identity, their actual, looking to have surgery, exploratory and surgery done to see if they had undescended testes. And so Polly believed that they were probably intersex, and at that point in their lives were seeking a different identity. As they moved through their professional career, she did embrace the role of being a woman, or at least the identity of being a woman, and created legal work that led to a lot of anti-sexism legal work. So her identity is very complicated and doesn't have exactly the same parameters that people who are young today have around understanding their identities. The Polly Murray Center in North Carolina has beautiful resources explaining why they use the pronouns that they use when they talk about Polly Murray, who died 15 years ago now, 20 years ago. She lived a nice long life. But so it's a great example of a person who did leave some degree of a historical record about the way they were feeling about their identity as potentially what we say today as a trans man. So I think that's a great way where you can allow students to do some work, research around what it would mean to identify in a certain way at a certain time period, what the historical record could look like, what it does look like. And then at the end of the day, what we do in history, it's hard for us to give hard yeses and nos about any question because people are complex. And if they are privileged to live long lives, they often move and shape, and the context moves and shapes around them. So allowing your students to have that nuance of we don't really know without it being erasure, without it saying, well, there weren't any people in the LGBT community 100, 200, 300 years ago. So it's a real challenge to sort of, let that sit with students. But that is the whole work of history, is embracing that work of how do we know what we know? So I think we're good on time. I might have gone over a little bit. Kyle, I'd love to turn it over to you to welcome questions or further inquiries.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for the presentation. Anyone can feel free to come off mute and ask any questions they may have.
We've put things in the chat on how to get in touch with us. Why do I have J. Clark?
I am unsure. My email is K.
Because somebody's a historian and doesn't know her alphabet. Wow. That is not who I want you to email. I want you to email kclark@hsb.org. Ooh.
Justine and Katie, I have one quick question in regards to Dr. Fryer. Is there any memorial or any type of work that like Temple has done in regards with Dr. Fryer at all? I'm just wondering because I was shocked to see with so much history coming from Dr. Fry
Yeah.
was in Temple at the time.
Have they done? We hosted a nice big commemoration last year for the 50th anniversary of this. And you know, we worked with William Way, we worked with the Association of Gay and Lesbian Psychiatrists, Preservation Alliance. I'm trying to think if Temple was there. I will say he got kicked out of Penn, didn't he? He was at Penn and had a bad experience in one way or another. And I think Temple maybe like he sort of landed more safely at Temple than he did.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those times where I would have to say, I don't know exactly, right? But it is something I imagine, if I cannot speak for Temple's, you know, response or things like that, but I do know within the some 400 boxes of John Fryer's papers, there is a letter that he wrote to his family, I think, towards the end of his career. And so I would be hopeful that if we looked at a document like that, we could get a sense, at least from, again, his perspective of what his, you know, his tenure was like, and if he did face those kinds of ramifications, because he did not remain anonymous for the entirety of his career. He was quote unquote unmasked, I think in the 80s.
Yeah, it was later. It
1985.
wasn't right away.
Mhm.
And he didn't actually speak of it broadly. I mean, it was known that he was Dr. Anonymous, I think, but it wasn't, he certainly didn't like work the legacy. And we didn't get his papers from him. We got them from a friend after he died. There are two works of art that are based on this story. There was a documentary called Cured that PBS hosted, and they ran it last year. Cured because once it's removed from the DSM, people were instantly cured of the illness that they had been, you know, diagnosed with for all their lives. So that's what in the article there, the instant cure is when it got removed from the DSM. And there was a documentary done in recent years and ran last year. And then we hosted a playwright, Aine Gordon, who's a national playwright, was embedded as an artist in residence back in 2015, 2016. And he did a play that was hosted at the Painted Bride about John Fryer. And we have that script in the collection then too. But I haven't reached out to Temple. I can't remember if anybody was there last year at the event.
Yeah, no worries. Just
Be a good invitation.
Nice. Just was curious. But if there's no other questions, I just want to say thank you so much to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. Thank you, Katie and Justine. I really appreciate all your support. And just encourage everyone on the call and who record see the recording of the video to please check out the Historical Society of PA with all the great resources they have. So thank you again, and thank you all for attending. Greatly appreciate it. I will follow up with a brief email, hoping to just get some feedback on today's session. It'll take less than 2 minutes, so if you can fill that out, I would greatly appreciate it. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, friends.
All right, take care.